Oh, thanks very much. I really appreciate being here. So obviously my name is Deirdre Lewis. My role at Origin is the Head of Health and Safety. Origin is 20 years old this year, which in terms of age of organisations, pretty young organisation. So haven't been around that long. I started in Origin in 2011. So this is my 9th year, which is almost half the life of Origin and almost half the life of my children as well, which is quite interesting when you see how they've been brought up through the Origin business. So the reason that Origin I was headhunted into the business, and really what was going on in the business at the time was that there was a desire to improve what was going on in the business. I was brought in specifically to support the LPG business, which was a business that was really struggling, both in terms of their commercial outcomes and their safety outcomes. There was a lot of support from senior leadership in terms of really trying to take the organisation on a journey and to improve both operational efficiency but also from a safety perspective. To give you, I guess, a bit of some context, and we'll talk safety one, the organisation that I started in was having 10 recordable injuries a month, and TRIFR, I think at the time, was like 40 or 30 or something like that. We were rolling B doubles full of gas, so 40-tonne B doubles full of gas down hills relatively frequently, and there was significant amount of quite high potential incidents occurring in the business at the time. The reason some of those incidents got airplay was because somebody dislocated a shoulder, not because we'd actually rolled 40 tonnes of LPG down a hill. So that was kind of where we were at when I joined the organisation. The senior leadership in the business really recognised that something wasn't quite right and we really needed to change. And they also realised that a different kind of support was required. There was a lot of HSE people within the organisation at the time, and they realised that something wasn't working. So I was brought in, unbeknownst to me, as a bit of a change agent. So I found that out pretty quickly, day one probably. So here we go. There we go. So I really wanted to talk a little bit about my approach and how I went about trying to understand the organisation and what I'd walked into, really. So really what I started to do was to really think about how I was going to listen to what was going on in the organisation and to learn about what was going well, because obviously a lot was going well within this organisation. Both from a frontline perspective, the middle management's perspective and the senior executive perspective. So the perspective is quite interestingly very different. So what I was hearing from the frontline was very different to middle management, and again very different from the executives. So I spent a lot of time at the sites, as you can see, and a lot of time with the workers and also the frontline supervision, like months I spent. Really wanted to gain some insights in terms of the priorities at the front line, but also the priorities of the executives. And then I had a look at the data, because data is something that we love to look at. We're an engineering organisation, data's pretty important, so I went and had a look at data. And then really tried to see what the data was saying and what it wasn't saying as well. So there was lots of information around what wasn't going well. And then there was information that would imply that things were going very well at some sites because there was nothing, which wasn't necessarily the story. So I had a look at the data. You can see here that we've got senior executives out on site, which you can see Dave there. You saw a picture of Dave there over there in the corner. Really early on, one of the things that I found was that we had a lot of HSE people. So the HSE team sat in what I would call a pseudo head office. So the head office of the organisation is in Sydney, but then we created a pseudo head office with HSE people sitting in Melbourne. So lots of safety people. So I would say probably in the order of magnitude of about 40 safety people. And they all sat in the office in Melbourne. when something happened, the HSC team flew out to the site at Alice Springs, or flew out to Darwin, or flew out to the Pacific and did the investigation. So we were doing safety to the operational business, telling them what they'd done wrong and how they'd failed, and then coming back into the office and then wondering why they weren't following up and doing the corrective actions as we had told them that they should do. So that was really part of the culture of the organisation back then, but I changed that. So what I decided to do was that we really needed to think about who we were employing in those roles, what those people were doing, and how we were partnering with the organisation versus telling the organisation what was wrong with them. So I hired a different group of people who had different skills and really started to partner with the frontline people. So part of what we did was remove people from the head office location and relocated my team into the business. So had people sitting in the major hazard facilities, working at the sites, in the sites with the business. What that did was really, there was a complete lack of trust between the function and the line. And what that really started to do over time was to build some trust. So we would then start to get stories, the real stories of what was going on. We'd start to hear people talk to us about what the problems were in our organisation and some of the challenges they faced, the work that was actually happening versus what was coming down. They talk about it, what was coming down the funnel onto them for them to do. So they would listen to that and go, oh, as soon as they go, we can go back to doing what we normally do. So it's almost like they had their head down until the problem went away. So I really tried to change that. And we fostered relationships with the frontline. So the team really started to build those relationships. We started to listen to the issues versus making judgments about what they were doing or what they weren't doing. And then supported them and really try to understand why mistakes were being made, and then how do we support people when mistakes are being made to learn from those sorts of things. What came out of that was a lot of discussion around how the system was hampering safe work at the front line. So we took some really simple things and adapted the system. So 30-page document that told people how to fill a cylinder with gas ended up being a one-page document that they essentially wrote. Lined it up with the regulation, but one-page document. And then they created the tool whereby that they could actually look at that one page and self-audit. So those sorts of things started to happen, and then we started to tell stories. So really interestingly, this business, 70 sites across Australia and the Asia Pacific context, so 40 sites in Australia and 8 countries, 30 sites in Asia. They had no idea each other existed. So we found a solution in one place, or an operational team found a solution in one place, and we had the issue in 30 other locations. So, but they had no idea that they even existed, let alone that there was learning that they could be doing as a collective. So we started a movement, if you like, around connecting people and helping them to tell their stories to each other. You can see here down the bottom, that's our PNG team there, and our Fiji gas team over there on the left-hand side. Very early on, 2012, so probably in the business about 6 months, and thought, gosh, there's so much opportunity here to co-create learning in our organisation and really think about how do we operationalise some of this stuff and make it less corporate-y and less inaccessible. So we did some really interesting stuff with a group called Locomotive. I don't know if any of you've ever had any exposure to them, but they talk about operations, safe operation, not let's do a safety program. It was about how do we integrate safety and operational performance together so that we can be efficient and safe at the same time. So that was really a great program that was run, and we thought very carefully about the language. So some of the language we used were things like having an excellent failure. So we talked about how do we fail and how it's kind of cool to fail because that's where we learn. We talked about backmarking each other. So if somebody made a mistake, if somebody come in to support and have a conversation that was, it wasn't a blame conversation. So that really helped people to start really talking to each other versus going, thank God it's not me, it's him over there or her over there. And that was really helpful. The other thing that we did quite early on was really think about how do we value what's happening at the front line. So often the value proposition was about what was happening in the office. So people were talking about how great the toolbox talk that corporate created, or how great was the shiny presentation, versus really thinking about how do we celebrate and think about the great things that were happening from the front line. So you can see, I love this photo up the top. These are the rough old blokes out at Mount Isa had some absolutely awesome ideas around how they could improve safety there, that then got translated across the organisation. Really simple ideas. And we started to showcase them. We introduced them to each other and we showcased them. So the ways that we did that, we introduced something very simple. We called it the Friday call. So all of the operational leaders came together on Friday for 40 minutes, half an hour, and they talked about what was happening in their business and the good things that were going on, the things that were challenging for them, and it created an environment where they could share their learnings and the things that they needed help with. The other thing we did was I created a thing called a Gazette. So when I first started the Gazette, it was a Sunday night job where somebody would send me a photo and go, oh, this is a really cool thing that happened in, Albany or up in Samoa. So I just put it together in a little note and send it out to the business. And once we started to do that, the teams were like, whoa, I want to be in that. I want somebody to see what great work I'm doing. And it really got some momentum. And then we started actually meeting each other through just really simple mechanisms around telling people's story and gazetting, those things. We initiated a safety award, so a lot of organisations have safety awards, but our safety awards are really about celebrating the success and the things that go right every day and why they go right at the front line, by the front line. So it started really small, really small. It was on a camera and an iPhone, and now we've elevated that and we've rolled that out across all of Origin. So some really fantastic frontline initiatives that really have added value, not just at a site or with a particular group of people, but way across the organisation. So that's been a huge success. I'm really proud of some of the stories. So I'm actually going to show you the video of one of those things in a minute, so you can actually see how that looks. Actually, before that starts, I might just give you a little bit of context. So we bought a business, it's a small business called Horan and Bird. Any Queenslanders up here would probably hear about Horan and Bird. They're a solar business we bought. Quite a little mum and dad kind of operation, and when you work in a large organisation, one of the challenges is how to not erode value or culture within a small team. This team really, they're like a family, like they look after each other, and they wanted to make sure that they were looking after their people. So we'd actually done a bit of work around what was happening in the broader context in terms of apprentices. So we'd seen quite a few fatalities happen in the broader context, not in our business, around apprentices and how apprentices work. So we started a dialogue around, well, what are we doing and why don't we kill our apprentices? Like, this is a really interesting conversation. And they started talking about the fact that we really value our apprentices and we do a whole heap of things with them, but there's so much more that we can do. So this little video is about their learning journey and what they've done when work goes well and what they've done to build on that.
Horan and Bird, we were a small contracting company and progressively over the years grew. We predominantly are a solar company at the moment. We do small domestic installs through to large commercial. Origin purchased the company. We still trade as Horan and Bird because of the name and in the area, very well known. We're standing in front of the training board and station. It came about because we've got some young guys, so we want to be able to build the confidence to attack a job, be it from a small job to a large job. If you know the basics on how to fault find or do an installation, you will be able to install it.
This environment in particular, it's just easy to work. Hasn't got as much strain as you would deal with out on the work site, knowing that you're not going to cause a danger if this issue occurs in here, because it's fully supervised. Every safety procedure is in the way. It's isolated from our main workshop, being over here just in the storage facility.
This makes their job safer because one, they understand what they're doing, and two, they won't take risks where they don't know how to do it. They won't try and commission something that isn't installed correctly. We know we go through all their testing processes and procedures. They know how to test from start to finish. If something does go wrong, well then they will be able to rectify it immediately. And it ranges from first year apprentices through to our tradesmen.
It just gives you a much better understanding, being able to follow it through from start to finish. You get to run the mains, you get to do the circuit hookups, you get to test when you're finished, make sure everything you've done is correct. If there's a problem, you're the one who can pick it up and you know what you've done and you can learn from your mistakes.
I had a lot of one-on-one training because I come from a small company, but when you're with a larger company, you don't get this inside your workshop, and I think it is really good. I wish I had, well, definitely wish I had this when I was an apprentice for sure.
So that actually came from a conversation that occurred about looking at how apprentices work and the risk to apprentices, young people outside of our organisation. So it was a fantastic way they've picked that up. They've gone, we want to do more, and they designed that, they built it. All they needed was somebody to say, yes, have a crack. So I think that's fantastic. So, okay, keep going. Oh. Okay, so really we wanted to build on our progress. So part of that was really to take some of the work that we'd already done. We had a look at some of the theory. We had a frontline program that was developed, and then what we did was it was actually quite. It was done quite from a senior perspective. So everybody's probably been on a safety program at some point in time. Probably multiple safety programs. And one of the things that we found was that the work where it was actually happening had only been touched at the frontline level. So the frontline leaders said, well, it's really great. It was really good to go on that 7-day program, but gosh, wouldn't it be great if we could take those concepts and bring it into work at the frontline. So we said, okay, well, what does that look like? Because we don't really know what that looks like. So we brought the frontline guys in together, the line leaders and the operators, and created a 2.5-hour workshop that they created. They ran it, they organised themselves, and they delivered all the content. They had such courage in terms of putting themselves out there to do that, because they weren't trainers, they weren't facilitators, but they owned it, and it was fantastic. So that really made a huge difference, and they were talking about things that they had experienced. They used real life examples and what they had done. So part of that was engaging with contractors. So I know Michelle was talking earlier, so Dan is one of our contractors. So we brought our contractors into the room. We really wanted to engage our contractors in the discussion around where we were going, because they're a real part of our journey as well. So we're not there yet, but we're trying really hard. Okay, and finally, there's more to come. So we're still on our voyage, which I loved that Eric talked about voyage versus journey, because that's how it feels. Sometimes you're in a boat in the middle of an ocean and you're not really sure where you're going. But we really want to pivot. So sometimes we're proactive, but often we're reactive. So really want to try and pivot to be more proactive and forward-looking in our thinking. We're already doing pre-accident investigations, but it's about then how much time do we spend on them versus incident investigations. So really trying to pivot our thinking about how do we get ahead of the curve versus always responding to things that go wrong. We've done some work around recognising our own bias and where that leads us, and then suspending judgment. So it's really easy to get into a place where individually we're judging what goes on in an organisation, we're judging our people, we're judging ourselves, we're judging our system. So we're spending time thinking about, well, what's our bias in this situation and how we're judging it. So that's part of our process. We're really thinking hard about work, learning from normal work. It's hard because especially when you're reactive and lots of things are going on, but we're trying to find capacity so that we can actually do more of that work. We've started dipping our toes into learning teams and not always spending our time in incident investigations, and that has been just such an awesome experience. So really invigorating the teams that have been involved in that at the front line, saying they feel empowered, they feel excited and energised about being part of those learning teams. So it's great. Valuing self-reporting more. The things we hear tend to be when people get pinged. So we're trying to figure out how to do that better. And then senior leadership's response when things go wrong, absolutely critical to build trust and to really think about, because you can erode trust in about a nanosecond and it takes a long time to build it. So working really hard with our senior leaders around how they respond when they hear bad news. And that's me.